Hello and welcome to yet another tutorial by Davies Media Design. My name is Michael Davies, and in today's tutorial I'll be showing you how to create a vector geometric potted plant. I know that sounds super complicated, but this is the design here. So as you can see, I just have a geometric pot down here, and then up top I have a succulent. I'll be using Inkscape 1.0, which is the latest version of Inkscape at the time of this tutorial. Before I get into that, don't forget to check out my website at daviesmediadesign.com. As always, I have tons of GIMP and Inkscape tutorials on here. You can also get more with a premium membership to Davies Media Design. And I have free software help articles, so definitely check that out. We'll be creating this design completely from scratch using all built-in Inkscape tools, so let's dive in. I'll start off by creating a new document, and I can do that by going to File, New. Once that's opened up, there's a couple of things I want to do to customize this. So I'll go to File, Document Properties, and I'm going to change the display units to pixels. And I'm also going to change the units down here to pixels. This is for my canvas size. So under Custom Size, I'm going to type 1920, hit the Tab key, and then type 1080. So that's just going to change the size of my canvas. I'm also going to check border on top of drawing so I can see the border if it does get overlapped by something. And I'll uncheck show border shadow. I don't really like the border shadow. Finally, I want to turn on the grid for this particular composition. This part's optional, but I'll come over here to grids, and I'm going to change this to axonometric grid, and then click new. So that's going to turn on this grid. I'm also going to come over here and just make sure the grid is nice and centered on my document. The spacing doesn't really matter. I'm just using this as a reference so I can eyeball it while I'm creating these designs. And I'll come over and exit out of here. Hold Control and use the mouse wheel to zoom in. Next, what I want to do is create a guide. So I'm going to click and drag this guide from the rulers onto my canvas. And then I'm just going to double click on it. And this is coincidentally perfectly centered here. So just type 960 here for your X value and click OK. And that will center up your guide. Now that our document is set up, it's time to start drawing some of the vector objects in here. I'll start with the pot. So I'm going to come over and grab my rectangle tool. And I'm just going to click and drag and draw a rectangle. And if you want to, you can come over here to the layers. So you can see here Shift Control L will open up the layers, or you can go to Layer, Layers. And right now we're drawing on layer 1. I do like working with layers inside of Inkscape. I think it makes it easy to keep things organized, as well as make sure you don't accidentally select the wrong thing. So I'm going to double click on this and rename this layer Pot. Hit the Enter key. So we've got our rectangle drawn here. What I'll do now is go to Path, Object to Path. So that will convert our rectangle to a path, and I'm holding Control and using the mouse wheel to zoom in, by the way. Once we have that, I'll grab my Edit Paths by Nodes tool, and I'm just going to click on the rectangle to make sure it's selected, and then I'm just going to click on this segment on the left side, and then come over here, shift click on the segment on the right side, and then come up top here and click Insert New Nodes into Selected Segments. So there you'll see we have new nodes. It also created nodes up top here, that's okay. But what I'm going to do with these new nodes, these central nodes, is I'm just going to click on one of them. So let's go with this one over here on the left side first. And I'm just going to, let me hold Control, zoom in a bit. I'm going to click and drag this outwards. And it does help to count how many lines you're going to the left using the grid. So that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we can go about right there. And hold Control, zoom out, and then I'm going to click on this node here and do the same thing. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I do have snapping turned on here, so this is snapping to the grid. Here is the snapping to the grid option. So I'll use the scroll bars to move around, and I just want to make sure this is the size I want before I proceed to the other vector objects. So what I'll do is come over and grab my select tool, and then I'm just going to drag this in using this scale handle, and I'll hold Control and Shift as I drag it in. So that looks pretty good right there. And I'm also going to use this handle here to sort of squish this a bit, maybe like so. Next, we're going to start drawing all of the sides of the pot, and this is pretty much just made up of all triangles, and we're gonna add some shading to make it look more geometric. So I'll need to draw my first triangle, and what I'll do is just click and drag a horizontal guide from the top, and I'm just gonna drag this to about where I want the bottom of this pot to be. Then what I'll do is come over here and grab my Bezier curves tool, and I'll hold Control, zoom in a bit. So what I'll do now is I'm just going to drag this near one of the corners here of the top, and then over here to the guide, so the part where the guides intersect. Back up top here, it should snap because we have all the snapping turned on. And holding the Control key to draw this in straight line mode, I'll click to connect that node. And there you'll see we have a triangle. I know that's advanced geometry for you guys. But next we're gonna draw another triangle over here on the right side. This one can be pretty much whatever you want it to be in terms of size. All you gotta do is make sure it comes down here to this guide. So we want this bottom of this triangle to be in line with the point of this triangle. So I'll click to create a node, and because there's a line right here in the grid, I'm just going to use that and click to create that node. Come over here, click once we reach the guides here, hold Control, zoom out with my mouse wheel, come up top and make sure that's connected, and there we have our second triangle. So now we need to do the final triangle up top here. So I'm going to come over here to where these intersect, click to create a node. I'm going to click right there. And this one I'm just going to draw right here at the end of this triangle, this point, and then come up top and make sure that's connected. So there we have the three triangles of this right side. What I need to do now is hold Control, zoom in. You could tell obviously these aren't aligned properly. So what I'll do first is grab my select tool, and I'll click on this first triangle, shift click on the second triangle, and then shift click on the third triangle. Come over here and grab my Edit Paths by Nodes tool, and I'm just going to select these three nodes that all converge on the same point, and then I'm just going to drag them upwards. And you might need to turn off snapping for this. I'm actually going to do that, so I'll come over here, turn off the Enable Snapping icon there, and just align that like so. Hold Control, zoom out, hold Control, zoom in here. So once again, I'll click on this once. That will select this node, and then I can just drag that until it aligns. You don't really have to worry about that being perfectly aligned right now because we actually are going to get rid of that stroke anyway, but you just want it to be pretty close. Once you're done, you can grab your select tool again. So actually, I don't want all three of these selected. I only want two of them. So let me click off of these and just click on the one triangle, shift click on the second one here. Then what I'll do is hit Control D. That's going to duplicate these. And then I can click on this. That's going to bring up my rotation handles and this little crosshair. You can click and drag this over and hold the Control key to keep it in straight line mode until it gets to the guide. You could turn snapping back on, by the way, and this should, I believe, snap to the guide. If not, it's all right. Anyway, once you get it close enough, you can release that. So this is just determining where we're going to flip these two. And when I hit the H key, you'll see those two will now flip. And when I click off of this, you can see now we have a nice symmetrical shape. Now it's time to do the base of the pot. So the same thing is going to apply here. We're going to use some triangles to create this. So hold Control, zoom in, and I'm going to grab the Bezier Curves tool. Now I'm going to click on this corner here, and you can drag this triangle to whatever point you want. I'll keep things easy and drag it to this point on the grid, since you can see this line's going to go over here to that point. So let's come back. Where were we? Right here. And by the way, I do have snapping back on. And then I can come up top and click once that's in place, and come over here and click, and now we have a triangle. I'll grab my select tool, Control D to duplicate this. Click on it once. That's going to bring up the crosshair. Move it over to about where the guide is. Hit the H key to flip it over. Now we have our two triangles. And lastly, we just need to add the final triangle here. So I'll come back to the Bezier Curves tool, and I'm just going to click on these points, the existing points of the triangles, and just close that out. There you can see we have our geometric base. So the alignment on the corners of these triangles isn't perfect. You can always go back and correct that. I'll show you how to do that in a second. But first we're going to color in the various triangles of the pot. So I'll grab my select tool, which you could just use the S key. I'm going to do that from this point forward. And you can see right now we have this bottom triangle selected. You can always click on it if you don't have it selected. But that's selected. I'm going to shift click to get rid of the stroke. So I'm using my swatches panel down here. And then I can just do a standard left click. Let's go with the 40% gray. That will give us a dark gray triangle there. Then I'll come up top. Let's go with this bigger triangle. So this one I want to do a slightly lighter gray. So we did 40%. Let's go 30% this time. So left click on the 30% gray, shift click on the X to get rid of the stroke. And then what I'll do for the outer triangles, I'm going to select both of them. We'll do a nice light color for these. So let's go with the 7.5% gray for now, and then shift click on the X. Let's try the inner triangles, so the slightly larger triangles. Those will make slightly darker, so we'll go maybe 10%, and then shift click. So we might want to do those a little darker, so maybe 20%. And then we'll come over here to the bottom, and these will maybe do 30%, shift click. So I'm not totally loving these colors. Let's come back to 20% gray for these two. And I'll shift click on both of these. Let's go with the slightly lighter. So we'll go 10% for these. And then come over here to the outer ones. 5% for those. That looks better, so we'll keep it at that. So you can see the gaps between the various shapes is sort of more noticeable now because we don't have strokes anymore. We can take care of that by holding Control and zooming in. Let's start right here. So you can see this one doesn't quite line up. So I'm going to grab the Edit Paths by Nodes tool, click on this shape. That's going to bring up this node, and then I'm just going to drag this like so. And I'm not going to do this perfectly. It is pretty hard to get rid of these gaps in Inkscape, but I'll just do it to the point where it's hardly noticeable. And hold Control, zoom in. You can also see here there are some gaps. So we'll try to move this. Let me turn off snapping for this portion. Come over here. And then click on this shape, click on this node, and drag that over. All right, so we're pretty much done with the grid at this point. So I'll go to View and Page Grid. And right now mine's unchecked for some reason. It should be checked, but that's all right. I'll just click on it. That'll get rid of it. And we can also move this guide here out of the way. I'm going to keep the center guide. So let's finish up the pot by finishing up the top. So I'm going to add a stroke to this, a white stroke. So I'll come over, shift click on the color white. That'll give that a stroke. I can double click on this stroke number here to bring up the stroke dialog or the fill-in stroke and change this to pixels. Let's go with 10 pixels for the stroke. And then I'm also going to change the interior color of this. So let's go with an orange color, not quite that orange, like a darker orange there. And then I'll hit Control D to duplicate that. Drag this down, so we're going to turn this part into dirt. So about right there. And what I'll need to do first is come back up to the original, Control D to duplicate it. Let's move it down one using this icon here. So that'll move that object down. Shift click, so now that duplicate up top and the original down below are now selected. And finally, we'll go to Path, Intersection. So that will only leave the intersecting shape there. I'll come down here, let's go with the brown color for the dirt. You can go with a lighter or a darker, and then shift click to get rid of the stroke. So that's going to be the inside of the pot. And it looks like maybe this shape here doesn't have its stroke, even though it should. And the reason for that is that it is located below all these other shapes. So what I need to do is shift click on this dirt shape. So I have both the outer shape and the dirt shape selected. Come up top here and we're going to change the order. So we're going to raise this selection to the top. And there you can see now we have our stroke. So I'll hit Control S to save this. So we'll name this Potted Geometric Plant. Hit the Enter key. Now that we're done with the pot portion of this, we can move on to the plant portion. So what I'll do for this is come over to the layer. So again, Shift Control L. And I'm going to click this plus icon here to create a new layer. And I'll name this Plant. Position will be above current, and I'll click Add. So there is the plant layer. I can lock this pot layer for now. So that's why I like using the layers. And actually, let me unlock this because I do want to scale this down. So let me select everything, and I'm going to use Control and Shift to scale this down a bit. So once we have this at the size we want, let me also bring it down a little bit. Now we can come back up top and lock that. So now let's draw the plant. To do this, I'll grab the Bezier Curves tool, and I'm going to make sure my snapping is turned on here. And now I'm going to use this guide to click and then hold the Control key, click up top here. Then I'll come down back to the original node and click and drag. That's going to create this curved segment, and I'll release. So that looks nothing like what we want. So what I'll do is grab the Edit Paths by Nodes tool. I'm going to click on this segment here, and then come up top and click to create some nodes in between that segment. And I can keep clicking this to create multiple nodes. So you can see the effect there. And now with these multiple nodes, I can adjust the shape of this. So what I like to do is, for the very top, I'm going to have it come up like that. So for that portion, let me hit Control Z. Let's make sure only a single node is selected here. So we'll put this one way up top like so. Same with the second node here. Maybe we'll just move it over here a bit. So I'm just clicking on these nodes and moving them into place. This is pretty rough right now. And if you need more nodes, you can always click on a segment and then come over here and click to add a node. But let's come back up top here. All right, so hold Control, zoom out. We can see how this is going to look on the other side as well by grabbing the Select tool. And I can hit Control D to duplicate this. Click on this shape, and we can move the crosshair over until it intersects with the guide there, and then hit the H key. And we can manually move this over a bit more, like so. So that looks pretty good to me. Now I'm going to color these both in. So I'll start with the right side. I'll come over here to the swatches panel. That's the wrong scroll bar, so this bottom scroll bar. And I'm going to scroll over until I get to the color green I like. So this color here is going to work pretty well. So I'll click on one of these slightly lighter, the middle green tone there. Maybe I'll go slightly darker. And then for the left side, I'll go with a slightly lighter color. And I also want to get rid of the strokes on these, so I'll shift click on both. And let's scroll back over to the left and shift click. So there is going to be the smaller portion of the plant, but there's also going to be a larger portion outside here. So what I'll do is click off of this and click on the right side, Control D to duplicate that, and then I'm just going to use the handle to stretch this side out. And let's scroll back over to the green we were using, this one right here. So let's go with a darker green, and then we can move this to the very back. So I want this over on the left side as well, so I'll hit Control D to duplicate that. Click on it once to bring up these handles, and you can see the little crosshairs already there on the guide. So now I'll hit the H key to flip it over, and then I'm going to click to move this to the very back. And we do need to adjust the sizes here. So what I'll do is I'm just going to eyeball this, so I'm going to move these skinnier ones in more. It's okay if they're not perfect. Most plants aren't going to be totally symmetrical anyway. Finally, what I want to do is hit Control D, so we'll duplicate that again. And this time we'll click on a lighter green. And then we're just going to move this down one spot so it's below the original. And just move this out very slightly, so now there is a nice highlight there. We'll do the same on this side, Control D. We're going to change this to a lighter color. And I'm going to come over here and just move this down a spot, or however many spots it takes to get it below the original. And then I'm just going to click and drag this out slightly. Finally, I'll do the same for the outer ones, so I'll just shift click on both to save some time, Control D, change the color of this to a lighter color. In this case, we can go all the way to the back, and then we can click to move this side out, and then come over here and then click and drag to move this side out. And now all of these have their own little highlight. So now I'll move on to the top portion. I have like a top flower up here. I'll just do the same thing. I'm going to grab the Bezier Curves tool and hold Control, zoom in with my mouse wheel. So I'm just going to click towards the guide and then hold Control, come up top, click again, and then come down here, click and drag. I'll grab my Edit Paths by Nodes tool, click on this segment, and then click to add some nodes in here. And let me just click on this bottom segment and click to add a node there. And now we can just adjust this. This part can be whatever you guys want, again, based on the shape you're going for. All right, so that'll probably be fine. We'll hit the S key to grab the select tool, Control D to duplicate it. Click on this to bring up these rotation handles, and we'll Control click to drag this little crosshair over. Hit the H key to flip it over, and I'll hold Control. We just need to make sure this isn't too far over. So I just use the right arrow key to move that over slightly. Shift click on both of these. So what I can do is scroll over now to, let's go with the pinkish color. So let's go with this light pink here, and I'll click off of these. Let me click on the right side, and let's go with the slightly darker color for that right side. Shift click on both again. Let's move back over here, and then I'm going to shift click to get rid of the strokes. Control D to duplicate both of these. And I'm going to move over to this side here. So let's go with the darker pink color. That's probably fine. And I'm going to move these back until they are below the originals. And I'm going to move them out pretty significantly. Probably let's go with about right here. I can do the same on this side. So I'm not duplicating it this time, I'm just eyeballing it. It's okay if it's not perfect. And I'll come back in here, and I'm just going to drag the smaller one in a bit. Same with this one, like so. And let me just shift click on all four of these. You can also scale this down a bit and squish it if you want to. It's up to you. All right, so there is that flower on the top. Pretty much the last portion of this tutorial is going to be just adding in those little details, so the little cactus pricks and maybe the little dots on the flower. You'll see what I'm talking about. But actually first, let me just add the highlights in here real quick. So I'll click off of this. I'll come over here and shift click on these two and come over and make these a nice light color. And we can move them out a bit like so. And then just move these down in the object stacking order. So you can see that I can't move these two down together without one of them getting hidden. So let me move these back up, click off of them, and click on this left side and move that one down on its own. And then I'll do the same for these two. So shift click, Control D to duplicate them. And we'll change this to a lighter color. And I'm just going to move these down. This time it doesn't matter about selecting one of them, so we can do them both simultaneously. But I'll move those out like so. And now we have that highlight portion done on the top as well. So let's click off of that. We're going to select everything, Control G to group that. Let's add little details on here. So I'll come over and grab the ellipse tool, and I'm just going to draw like an oval shape, like so. Grab my select tool, we'll click on this to bring up the rotation handles and just rotate that slightly. And we'll place it about right there. Control D to duplicate it, and we'll move this over. The transform handles are still there for the rotation, so I'll just rotate that. Control D, move this down, and then rotate. You can add a fourth if you want. I think that's going to be fine. So I'm just going to shift click on these, Control D to duplicate, and then the H key to flip them over, and then I can just control and drag these over. So now those are on the right side as well. And we'll do the same for the bigger portions here. So I'll grab the ellipse tool. Once again, just draw an ellipse. You can make these slightly smaller if you want. Grab the select tool, click on this again to bring up the rotation handles and rotate that. So I'm just going to shift click on all these, Control D to duplicate, H to flip them, and hold the Control key while I drag it over here to the other side. So there's all the details for that top portion. You might want to select all of these again and then Control G to group them. So now this little flower has all the elements grouped together. I'll hit Control Z. Lastly, we're going to add the cactus portion, so the little prickly things. To do that, I'm just going to use the star shape tool. So under here, under the ellipse tool is going to be the star shape. So just make sure this is set to star, and it doesn't matter what you have it set to originally. So I'm just going to click and drag this. This obviously doesn't look anything like what I wanted to. So we'll go with about right there. So we have to adjust this a little bit. First off, I'm going to change the corners to 5. This doesn't need 30 corners. And then the spoke ratio we can decrease significantly. I believe I went with 0.175 for this. Hit the tab key. Now we have a star shape, and it looks like the little prickly things you see on a cactus. I apologize for not knowing what those are actually called. But now we can use the scale handle to scale this up or down. Probably go with about right there. And finally use the scroll bar and find that green we were using. So this green color here. So what I'll do is just go with this green for now. And then I'm just going to double click on the fill color. And inside of fill in stroke, we're just going to adjust this. So we'll drag the hue over slightly. And then we'll also increase the lightness. So I am on the HSL sliders, by the way. But I increase the lightness there, and then decrease, maybe increase the saturation. I'm just trying to find the right color for this. It's definitely going to take some tweaking. So that looks pretty good to me. Maybe increase the saturation slightly. And once you have the color for this, you can position it and maybe click on this and just rotate it a bit. And then Control D to duplicate it. And you could just create multiple little cactus spikes. And then shift click on these 4. Control G to group them. Control D to duplicate them. Use this little crosshair to move it over, and then hit the H key. And then we're going to do that one more time. So we'll click on this, Control D to duplicate it. We'll move this over, and I'm going to hit Control Shift G. That's going to ungroup all those. I'm just going to reposition some of these, just so it's slightly different. And maybe even Control D. That way we have one more. And then I'm going to shift click on all of these. Control G to group them. Control D to duplicate. Let's click on this once to bring up the crosshair, move it over. H key to flip. And you can sort of adjust this like that. So I do want to move this down a little bit, so I'm going to click and drag my mouse over this. You can also just click on it. I forgot we did group this. And what I'll do is just play around with the order, so you could have it sitting like that, or maybe like that. Let's move it up a bit. And this looks too much like a butt or something, so I'm going to shift click on these two, grab the Edit Paths by Nodes tool, and I'm just going to click and drag over this node here and drag this up like that. That looks pretty good. And there is our plant. All right, that's it for this tutorial. Hopefully you liked it. If you did, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and like this video. You can also check out any of the links to my resources in the description of the video. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.